Greetings, students, and welcome to the special domestic edition of The Professor Travel. I am your host, The Professor Travel, coming to you from Orange County, California. This is the website, the vlog, and the podcast that you come to in order to learn about different travel destinations. This is where we come as a community in order to discuss them. Hopefully, this will inspire you to travel more and ultimately to enjoy life more. Now, you can reach me on a variety of different social media outlets, but starting, of course, with my website, which is at theprofessortravel.com. On YouTube, on Facebook, and now on TikTok, you can find me at The Professor Travel. If you're an Instagrammer, you can find me on Instagram at _professor_travel. If you're a Twitter, you can find me on Twitter at theprofessortr1. And then finally, if you are a blogger, you can find me on Blogspot at theprofessortravel.blogspot.com. Today, I am so very pleased to introduce you to our visiting professor, Phil Bohlender from the great state of Texas. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, before we get started, I want to ask you a little bit about the picture. And by the way, for those that are listening through the podcast, you're going to have to come to the YouTube site to see this. This is a really beautiful picture of you, and it looks like some kind of a really nice town that's in your background. Talk to me a little bit about this.
Yes, okay, so thank you. So first and foremost, it's in Alaska, and if my memory serves me, it could be Ketchikan. And so that is me with my husband, Michael, and we are actually on our second honeymoon that celebrated not only our anniversary, also my ending my corporate career after 35 years. And so we moved to Alaska, and we went back to Seattle where we got married and had an amazing 10 days up there.
That sounds like a lot of fun. When was this? How long ago was this?
So that's only 4 years ago. Actually, 4 years ago this week to be exact.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations on all your endeavors, both on the retirement from corporate life as well as the wonderful travel. So
thank you.
Now, for the benefit of those who may not be familiar with your background, maybe you could share with us a little bit about your credentials, either some of your educational background, travel, or a little bit of both.
So I won't give you the whole big story. I'll give you the short version. Started my corporate career in 1982, and I retired in 2017. And during those 35 years, I worked on 5 continents and more than 20 countries. And so quite an extensive set of experiences globally, which I'm really grateful for. So that ties into the travel. And when I wasn't traveling for business, I was traveling for pleasure. So, you know, places that I dreamed of going, like Sydney, Australia, and Rio de Janeiro and so on. Not only did I get to go to them once, I got to go to them twice and more times. And so it's kind of amazing when I look at my reflections of my travels. And so my career was basically spent working in the service industry, with the last part of it working in manufacturing. So very, very well-rounded.
Okay.
A lot of fun in operations and human resources leadership roles. And my degree is a bachelor's degree in psychology that has supported me really well in working with others.
That's fantastic. Let me ask you a quick travel question. Do you guys have any special travel plans coming up in the relative future, or any like over the next year?
Yes, so actually we do. I'm in the process of planning a trip for us to go to Ecuador. So I've been before, my husband has not. And so we have friends that have retired down there. And we think it's a good idea to get out later this year and get down there and spend some time with some friends of ours.
That's going to be great, especially with the pandemic kind of wrapping up right now. It seems like a lot of people are wanting, they've got the travel bug again, and they really just want to get out there and have some fun. So
that's exactly right. And we don't necessarily, as you can see from the picture, we don't necessarily do things small, you know, so we're coming out of pandemic, and where are we going to go? Oh, pin on Ecuador.
That's fantastic, though. Again, thank you so much for helping me with this. And I know my students greatly appreciate it. So for purposes of today's interview, we're going to talk about the great state of Texas. Now, you've lived there for how many years now?
Well, I'm not going to count the years. I'm just going to tell you the first year I was here. So the first year I was here was 1975. And that's when I got my driver's license here and became a resident. So 1975 is when I moved here.
Okay, so share with me a little bit about history of the great state of Texas, because I honestly don't know almost anything except for what I've heard about the Alamo, and I really don't understand that too much. But share with me just in general what you can share with me about Texas.
So so you mentioned the Alamo. It's interesting because the Alamo is really one of the historical points of location here that people most recognize, right? However, what you don't know necessarily is that there are a set of missions that are outside of the city that are actually, in my opinion, much more beautiful. I mean, there are churches and you know, housings, and I mean, it's just amazing how people go to the Alamo, and then beyond there is this whole set of missions that are really amazing to get to visit. So clearly, the history includes the Mexicans being in Texas, and you know, coming up into the San Antonio lower area. There's also history in Houston around battles that went on there. Not so much the northern part of the state in my recollection. And I didn't study history here because that was offered at a younger age. I just know that Texas has a really robust history that led to its cultural diversity that it has right now. So whereas people weren't living together necessarily in harmony in the past because of the wars and the battles and that, now we have quite a diverse set of communities here that actually stayed after these wars were completed.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Mhm.
So, I mean, for the most part, Texas wasn't obviously one of the first 13 colonies in the United
No,
States.
no.
It came about much later on, but at the same time, it's one of the largest states that you have within the Union, like
Yes.
sizable.
So Texas is located in the center of the United States and the very south, the most southern part. So if you were to go from the East Coast or the West Coast, go right smack dab in the middle and then go due south, you would hit Texas and then just continue to hit Texas all the way until you get to the Mexico border. I think Alaska by landmass is larger than Texas. However, it's much more remote. People here actually, for example, if we were to drive from here to El Paso, I think it could take as many as 10 to 12 hours. So I mean, it's a large, drawn out, uh, geographic diverse state.
Yeah, size wise, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. You know, Alaska is a little bit larger. Um, Texas obviously is more densely populated.
Yes,
And then in terms of size, I can kind of relate because I live in California. So driving from Southern California to San Francisco, for example, is like 8.5, 9 hours just to drive
exactly.
if you're lucky.
Yes.
So
Yeah, right.
yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
it's interesting what you say because I've been to Alaska twice on cruises. And what I didn't realize until I went on the cruises is exactly how remote it is. I mean, there literally are people that live in places that the only access that they have is either by water or by air. There's no
Yeah.
highways, no freeways, nothing to bring them in by, you know, by land. And so it's interesting being in a place that's that large that doesn't have what I'll call physical access, and then to come to Texas and know that you can get in the car and you can just keep driving and driving and driving and still be in the state.
Yeah, I myself, I've actually been to Alaska too. I went to Juneau, Ketchikan, Sitka, which I love Sitka. That was beautiful. And then
Yes,
and then obviously we traversed through Glacier Bay, which was just monumental. It's one of the
exactly.
most beautiful things there. But this is about Texas, so let's continue with having a conversation.
Yes.
So geographically speaking, what are the states for the especially for the people outside the United States who are not maybe familiar with where Texas is? What are the states that surround Texas?
So let me get my bearings. So if I'm looking at it, to the east is Louisiana, which has New Orleans. And then to the north, I think there's a bit of Arkansas that's in the northeastern corner. Oklahoma goes right across the top of the state. So if you go to the furthest part of Texas and go beyond, you'll be in Oklahoma. And then to the west of us is New Mexico. And I think that's all of the states. The border on the south, of course, is Mexico.
Mhm. And then in terms of weather within your state, I know sometimes you can get a little, yeah, but you're talking about the size, something the size of France, you know, literally
Yes.
it's a massive state. So obviously weather is going to be extremely varied as you get on the coast. You're going to get more coastal weather. As you get in the mountains, you're going to get more mountainous weather. But what are some of the more, like, you guys get 4 seasons for the most part, correct?
Texas gets to 4 seasons in certain regions of Texas, right? So in certain regions, for example, Northeast Texas, North Texas, that area would get the 4 seasons. So you'd have a, you know, a mild spring, a hot summer, and then a mild fall, and, you know, some winter. As you move south, the region with Houston, including San Antonio, we have typically mild. However, we have extremes. So one extreme that Houston has is their wet season. And so it can rain, day in and day out. And they're also on the coast, close enough to the coast for hurricanes to hit. So hurricanes are a common occurrence there. San Antonio is far enough away that we'll get the remnants of any rings of hurricanes. So, but our climate typically is arid or dry, except this past winter in February, we had snow days that accumulated up to 1 feet of snow, which is unprecedented. So there are these anomalies that happen. West Texas, of course, is sort of arid and canyons and, all of that type of stuff. So the thing about Texas is, and people say this jokingly and it lives out, you can have all 4 seasons in one day and you have to dress accordingly.
So layering, maybe if necessary.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I remember earlier this year, you did have quite a cold snap, which
Yes.
like blew out the power in a lot of
Yes.
the entire state.
Yes. We were without water. We were without water and electricity for the better part of 3 days. Yeah, the better part of 3 days.
That stuns me.
Yeah.
You think of those as like third world problems, not as first world problems.
Well,
And it just
exactly. And what was interesting about it was funny you should say that. So our first world problem was we had just bought a new recliner set for downstairs in front of the TV. And the one upstairs is manual. The one downstairs, we thought we'd get fancy and get the remote electric one. And so whenever we sat in it with no electricity, we couldn't recline.
now that's what I call a first world problem.
Right,
So
exactly. It's like we cannot recline this recliner.
now I feel so sad for you. Okay, so moving on.
It was challenging. It was very challenging.
That's totally fine. Okay, so let's talk about some of the culture within the great state of Texas. Now, with respect to the religion, it is a huge Southern Baptist community within your state. I think for the most part, it's primarily Christian, but you have pockets of different other varieties of different religions within the state too, correct?
That is correct. Yes. I would say that the Southern Baptist is really predominant in the northern part of the state. So north and east. So maybe from Fort Worth down to Austin and then over, right? So Southern Baptist. Then as you come into Austin, San Antonio, Houston, San Antonio especially, it's a very Catholic. It's very, very Catholic because of the Hispanic influence. So I would say Southern Baptist and Catholicism are the two primary, and as you said, overarching is Christianity. However, we have a Buddhist temple here, we have a Hindu temple here, so there's a lot of diversity that people don't necessarily think of. And it's not just in Austin, it's in other places as well.
Excellent. Now, in terms of the arts, usually when I think of the arts, I think of more of the fine arts like painting, drawing, dancing, things like that. But of course, acting, singing, things like that too. Obviously,
Yes.
Beyonce is from Texas. Forrest Whitaker is from Texas. Tommy Lee Jones. I mean, you have a variety of celebrities that are from Texas.
Yes.
Are there any that maybe I just hadn't like blurted out there that you were like, oh, I can't believe you didn't think about this person?
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that. And then, of course, I have Sandra Bullock. Sandra Bullock is from Austin. She lives in Austin. Going old school, Carol Burnett is from San Antonio. And so she's been here. The woman who played Alice on the Brady Bunch, she was from here. She lived here until she died recently. So yeah, there's quite a few celebrities that live in Texas. I'm most familiar with the ones. Eva Longoria is from Corpus Christi. She has a connection to San Antonio. So there's quite a few of them that have come from here and have gone out and made big and wonderful careers for themselves.
Excellent. Now, talk to me about the language within Texas, because it seems like they're really, I mean, English is obviously the predominant language within the United States, but it does seem like there is a really large Spanish speaking population.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
So what's really great about it is, because I'm somewhat bilingual, and so what's really great about it for me is that being able to speak Spanish in San Antonio is a tremendous asset. I can go into parts of San Antonio where Spanish is the first language, and that's how you get by in communicating with others. Other cities in the state are seeing more and more of that. So Houston has more of a Spanish-speaking population. Dallas does. Austin, for sure. So English is primary, Spanish is secondary. Some languages that people wouldn't expect here, German, because we have a heavy influence of Germans in the Hill Country. And so, for example, if you go to a place called Fredericksburg, the city street signs are in English and German, and they have a German reception area up there and that type of stuff. The Czechs, the Czech Republic, they brought us kolaches and we love them for it. So there's a big Czech population here. An area that people don't think of people coming from to here is Vietnam and Korea. For example, in Houston, the shoreline, obviously fishing and all that type of stuff, is predominantly Vietnamese that have come over here and they've settled in that area. And then Koreans, because San Antonio is military town USA, and so many of the military personnel have served in Korea. If they end up marrying a Korean or something like that, then they come over here, and now we have Korean restaurants and Korean grocery stores, and you can go in parts of San Antonio, Houston, others. And then the final one I'll share with you that sometimes people are surprised is Brazil. We have a lot of Brazilians that live in Texas, most of them in North Texas. So Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese specifically, is very easy to come in contact with.
That's fantastic. I'm really happy to see the variety of culture and the specifics of the language that goes there.
Yes.
Most would assume that it's because of the people that might be coming or patriating from Mexico, but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, it could just be a cultural mindset that, okay, well, people grew up with that language within their household. Maybe someone did come over from Mexico or from Spain. It doesn't really matter, but or just South America in general. And
Yeah.
then as they come through there, it's like this is shared, but it seems to be like permeating throughout all of Texas. It's a very largely spoken language.
It is. And what's interesting about it is in San Antonio, you have Spanish speaking people who are either people who were born and grew up here, or the Mexican nationals, because many of the Mexican nationals have homes here. So they'll come up and they'll buy a home here, and maybe they'll spend Semana Santa up here, which is Holy Week, or maybe they'll come up for the summer, they'll come up at shopping. This is all pre-COVID. They'll come up for shopping at the holidays. So it's interesting because those two languages don't overlap. There's a difference between the Spanish that's spoken in Mexico and the Spanish that's spoken in San Antonio. And I'm reminded of it because I learned Castilian, which is not Mexican style Spanish. So I get, the Castilian knocked out of me. And then when I speak to local people who speak Spanish, I get the Mexican Spanish knocked out of me. So it's kind of interesting looking at how one language, which is not different from English, one language can cut across so many different parts of the communities.
Absolutely. Let's move on to one of my favorite topics, which is diet and food. Oh my gosh, I am such a foodie. I love to do that. Whenever I travel, that's one of my things that I bring home with me. Is I love sharing experiences, having eaten stuff, and I'm not one of those people who necessarily posts all their food pics on Instagram or anything like that. But I do really like to share, a little bit of that. Texas is obviously known for its barbecue. It's known for its chili. Like, what are some things that distinctively stick out to you as Texan?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that because I'm like you. Whenever I travel anywhere, one of the first places I hit is either the grocery store or the open food markets, right? I want to get in and see what's going on. And then something that I started doing maybe about 10 years ago is I sign up for cooking classes in other places. And then that way I get to know the food and, learn how to cook it for when I come home and then what to eat while I'm there. So in Texas, I'm reminded of a experience I had with a woman from New York. This is going back probably 20 years ago. And she was New York City, through and through. And she thought New York City was the best place ever. And whenever she was a consultant that had come in to work with our company, whenever the idea of food came up, let's go to this restaurant or that restaurant, she kept looking down her nose at Houston and saying Houston couldn't possibly have good food like New York. So I did a little bit of research back then, and I said to her, and so this is going back 20 plus years ago, I said to her, did you realize that Houston has over 8,000 restaurants that represent every ethnic food available in the world? from that point forward, she's like, where are we going? Where are we going? Where are we going next? So the idea there is that Houston has only continued to grow as a global city. So when it comes to food, yes, you can get the best of the best barbecue in places close to Austin. I mean, it's Lockhart, Texas. If you want barbecue, you go there, and I mean, you just have the most amazing experiences around barbecue, and it ripples out into the state. So barbecue, number one. Tex-Mex on everybody's list. Everybody loves Tex-Mex. So whatever variation there is of it, people love it. Seafood is massive here. It's all about, fresh from the Gulf. So it's shrimp and red snapper and all that type of stuff. And then again, look at the influences. We have Asian influences here. So any of the Asian foods, Thai, Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, and I'm talking, you can get Chinese American or you can get Chinese. And I like being able to go to places where I can get Mexican food versus Tex-Mex. And Texas offers that. It offers the authentic, original cuisine done by people who have come here, whether it's from Italy or China or Brazil. I mean, when I lived here in San Antonio from 2000 to 2004, there was one Brazilian restaurant and everyone was going crazy over it. And unfortunately, their service model stunk. And so they went out of business. So then when I moved back
Oh,
in 2008, I can tell you now that there's at least 10 to 12 Brazilian restaurants that are thriving. So it gives you a sense of the food scene and how creative and adventurous people are here.
I could tell you a little story as well. When I was living in Jersey City, right across from Manhattan,
Uh-huh.
I had moved there with my partner at the time, and I left Southern California. I'd lived in California my entire life until I was 35 years old, and
Uh-huh.
went over there. He had a job in the fashion industry, so he was made on that. I I grew up on Chinese food and on Mexican food. So I was like, I'm kind of burnt out on it. I'm not really that big about it. So I'd love to see other things. So yeah, I enjoyed my time with, Italian food and Portuguese, like paella and stuff like that. It
Yeah.
was just like there was like a lot of really interesting things that I could get over in New York. And then
Yeah.
one day, out of nowhere, I start to get this craving again for Mexican food. And so I'm like, okay, so let me go find a Mexican restaurant around here. There's almost none. I mean, Spanish, yes.
Uh-huh.
Portuguese, yes. Just like so, I had to dig around, and I finally found this one Mexican restaurant that was in Jersey City. I'm like, okay, I'll go over there.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't have tortillas; they had pita. And I'm like,
Oh,
that's like blasphemous. How can you even do that? So it's like I felt to myself, I'm like, okay, this is not doing it for me. So we
no.
went into the city. I found one Mexican restaurant, and they were expensive as all get out. And I'm like, okay, you know what? When I get home, I'm gonna go visit my mom and dad, and I'm just gonna have like a blast. And ever since I come back, I'm here in California to retire.
Yes.
I absolutely love Mexican food now. It's
Yeah.
one of those things. I think when you have it so much when you're a child and it's just taken away from you, now
Yep.
it's presented with you again, and you're like, okay, now I get it. I get it. I'm so sorry.
Uh,
So
That's a
yeah.
great story. I love it because, yeah, I mean, one of the things that Michael accuses me of having traveled so much in the world, he'll say, "Let's go have Chinese," and I said, "Oh, do you mean Chinese American food?" And he's like, "Bill."
Actually, I was going to ask you a question. What in all of your travels and everywhere, and I know this veers off from Texas a little bit, so forgive me for my tangent here, but
Okay.
what is probably the most surprising food to you that you've like, wow, I wasn't aware I was going to like that. I really was impressed.
Oh, wow. Okay, so let me think about that a minute. So where in the world did I have food that it surprised me?
While you're thinking about it, I'll share with you one that I did.
Yeah.
We did a cruise of the Baltics,
Uh-huh.
and we went to St. Petersburg, Russia as part of that process.
Yep.
And the food in Russia surprised me. It was actually extremely good. And while we were there, we did this 2-day tour when we were in St. Petersburg. One day was at a more eclectic, more modern restaurant, but it
Mhm.
still had Russian flair to it, and it had a lot
Right.
of really good food. And then the second day was a very traditional troika restaurant that was like old school, really, really traditional Russian food. It was fantastic. I loved both the experiences, and it just really surprised me. I also like British food too, but don't fault me for that.
No, no,
So
no. I'm with you 100% with British food. And it's so funny because people are like, "What?" And I'm like, "No, no, no. I really enjoy it a lot. In fact, I'll make a good Sunday roast here, when the
yeah,
temperatures are crisp. I'll definitely do that. So I'm trying to think, because there were places that I went to that I anticipated that I wasn't going to like the food, and I ended up liking the food. I think Russia was definitely one of them. I thought, because the first time I went to Russia was, I want to think, 1992. So it was still a pretty bleak time over there. And yet, what I found was, over and over again, our host took us to some really amazing restaurants, and we had some really amazing food. So I would probably say that Russia surprised me with the food and the quality of the food. And that was on my first trip. Second trip, it was completely different. It was, all kinds of luxury and decadence, and all that kind of good stuff. But the first time, no. I mean, we were very pleased with it.
I have to throw a couple honorable mentions out while we're talking about food, because again, it's my favorite subject.
Yeah, exactly.
When I went to Thailand a few years ago, and the price of the food there was like pennies on the dollar to get like an amazing, amazing feast.
Yes.
Like I said with you just now, when we went to England, I was pleasantly surprised after all of the smack I had heard about
Yes.
British food.
Yes.
It was really good. And then finally, Spain. Oh my gosh, tapas and pinchas. Oh,
Oh.
fantastic. I could live off that stuff forever. Anyways, I'm sorry.
So
I'm getting hungry.
real quick, and then I promise we can move on.
Yeah.
So if you said to me, Phil, you can only have three cuisines of the world, Spanish food is at the top. And there is a restaurant literally 3 minutes drive from our house that has complete, authentic, from start to finish, every tapa, racion, all of it. And when we go there, it's like mind blown. 3 hours, just relax, soak it all up. So yeah, Spain is at the top of the list.
I'm definitely gonna have to visit you. I'm telling you.
Yeah, come to Texas.
Okay, we'll get into that in just a little bit.
Yes,
But at the same
exactly.
time, so let's move on a little bit to sports and recreation. So you have a few major teams within Texas that are obviously very, very big.
We
Houston
do.
Texans, Texas Rangers, Longhorns. I mean, obviously you've got quite a few there. Is there any that I'm not including that you're like, oh, I can't believe he didn't mention them?
So it's interesting, because living in San Antonio, the Spurs are a really, really big deal here, a very big deal here. And I've gotten to know their organization. Their organization is really an amazing organization. So I see their leadership and how their leadership plays out with their coach, their players. They're in a transformation right now.
That is
So
that owned by Mark Cuban?
no, he owns the Mavericks in Dallas.
Oh, okay.
So the Spurs are a standout. There's a lot of rivalries in Texas. So, for example, if you're not for the Dallas Cowboys, I hope my husband doesn't hear me say that. If you're not for the Dallas Cowboys, then that's it. Forget it. I remember when Houston was the Houston Oilers, and they were very popular, and all that type of stuff. So yeah, we have a lot of we have baseball, we have hockey, we have soccer. Soccer is really, really big here. So lots of sports, lots of attention to sports. People are ready to get back into the stadiums and the venues to see these events. Because let's face it, it's really, really big business here, the whole sports thing.
One other thing I was going to ask while we were just on this site and just concluding this, are there any state specific holidays that you're aware of in the state of Texas? I wasn't sure if like they celebrate the Alamo and everybody gets off school or anything like that. I didn't know.
So I can tell you one local to San Antonio, and we have this event typically in April every year, and it's called Fiesta. And Fiesta is about 12 days of fundraising events for all the nonprofits in San Antonio. And so there's two parades that take place during those 12 days. And one is in the evening, it's a flambeau, or a lit or lighted parade, and it's one of the largest of that style in the US. The other is what they call the Battle of the Flowers Parade. It happens on Friday midday. And schools and companies close down for kids and families to go to that. That's that big of a deal that San Antonio closes on the day for the Battle of the Flowers.
Now you alluded to this earlier, but you've lived in more than one place in Texas, correct?
I have, yes. Yes, I've lived. So when we moved here originally, with my mom, we moved to a place called Commerce, Texas, which is deep Northeast Texas, very rural. Lived on 25 acres of land, and that was a shock for a city kid from South Florida. And then I moved to Houston, and then I moved to San Antonio, and then the Dallas area, and then back to San Antonio. So I'm familiar with Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas, and I've spent enough time in Austin that I know the cities pretty well.
Excellent. Well, speaking of cities, let's move on to a population
Oh,
map
there.
here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have, and again, for the people who are listening via the podcast, I definitely want to apologize. You have to come over to the YouTube in order to see some of this stuff. But there's a few. First off, do you know about what the population size overall is with the state?
Oh gosh, good question. So let me do a quick math and see how quick I can come up with it.
Sure.
5, 10, 12, 14. I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 million.
Okay, perfect. And so there are a couple of areas that are highlighted on this map in orange.
Mhm.
Maybe you can help me better understand where these are. Like, what is
Yep.
this one that I'm circling right
So
now?
the one in North Central Texas that you're pointing out, that's the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex.
Okay.
And so Fort Worth is sort of it's sort of the second city, and yet it has amazing charm and old Texas, uh, experiences available to you. Then Dallas is the new shiny city, right? Dallas is all new and shiny and hip and all that kind of good stuff. I think I'm not supposed to use the word hip because that word's outdated, right? So anyway, Dallas is very shiny.
Is it isn't it outdated?
I wonder, right? I'll say groovy. Dallas is groovy.
Okay.
So Dallas is new, exciting, it's growing, very cosmopolitan. And what Dallas has done is it's expanded and grown north to where Collin County, which is north of Dallas, used to be fields of cows and agriculture and all that. And now you have, planned communities, state of the art schools, shopping like nobody's business. I remember I used to tell my friends, I bet I'm the only one who can drive through agricultural and cow farms to get to my Nordstroms. And they're like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I think I'm the only one because there was a Nordstrom's in Frisco that was in the middle of nowhere. So that area is growth, 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 very attractive for families. Education is good. I have a number of friends that just recently moved up there. Good economy.
And is Dallas a dry count? Like, is it a dry county or dry
So it's
city or
come a
what?
long way from what it used to be. It used to be that you had to have memberships. It used to be that you couldn't, sell alcohol in certain areas. I don't know how they've gotten around it because it was by precinct. So you could literally be in one precinct and have to bring your own bottle in and then be in the next precinct over and they could serve you a drink or you could buy membership. My experience living there most recently in 2004 to 2008, I didn't run into any of that at all. It's very different now than it was back. I mean, that coupled with the blue laws that we used to have where things were closed off on Sundays, that's all seems to have disappeared. It's not an experience that people have today.
Perfect. Okay, so what is this large metroplex over in this
Yeah,
area?
so that's so southeast, right near the coast. That's Houston, and the Houston metropolitan area. I believe it's the fourth largest city in the United States now. So the population has continued to grow and grow. Very dynamic. One of the things that they've been able to do over the years, I consider it to be my hometown because I lived there for 21 years as an adult. So what they've been able to do is diversify their economy. It's no longer based on oil and gas. There's other industries that have come in, financial, international organizations, et cetera. So the city continues to grow, has a great economy. They have great politics there in terms of doing progressive things for the city to continue to be recognized. The thing that stands out for me the most about it is I remember when I lived there, at one point, you could fly to London, Paris, and Frankfurt nonstop. Now you can fly anywhere in the world from Houston Airport, anywhere in the world.
That is amazing. You also have two other population centers, it looks like, right in this area here that are
Yes.
sizable. What are those?
So that is the future Austin San Antonio Metroplex. And the reason I frame it that way is because Austin to San Antonio is only about an hour's difference. And what's going on in between on the I-35 corridor is this continual growth. So now when you get on the highway and you travel from one city to the other, it's just like being in one big city. So it's only a matter of time before those two cities become sort of one metroplex, if you will. And there's a lot of work being done around that behind the scenes. So Austin's personality is summed up in its motto: "Keep Austin weird." They like to be weird. They like to be different. They like to come up with the crazy and the things that are out of the norm. Very, very accepting, lots of influence from University of Texas, and then the government is there. San Antonio tends to be more conservative. However, because of so many people moving into San Antonio from other parts of the country and the world, San Antonio is really going through a transformation of who are we? Who do we really want to be going forward? And keeping the core of community, the sense of community. And one thing that I appreciate about Austin, and I continue to watch them, and again, a lot of this is for me is around travel and watching travel. Austin has done a tremendous job of getting airlines to come in. For example, Austin has an Austin London nonstop now. They also have an Austin. It's a city in Scandinavia. I can't think of it right now off the top of my head. Anyway, they're out there getting all of these airlines to consider Austin, and San Antonio is more focused on Latin America, whereas Austin is focused on Europe. So between the two, I think, you heard it here first. I think there'll be an airport between the two cities at some point in the future. I may not live long enough for it. And it'll be on par with Dallas and Houston, and you can fly anywhere in the world from that single airport.
That's fantastic.
Mhm.
It brings up a funny conversation about a comedian I had heard. So this comedian was talking about Austin because he went to go do a show at Austin. And he went to go do a show in Portland, Oregon. And
Uh-huh.
he's like, I'm a weird guy. I'm kind of weird, like, where's the weirdness here? I don't see it. And they're like, oh, it's around and it's around. He's like, how dare Austin and Portland say they're weird when they know that Florida exists? So, I mean, so I thought that was kind of funny, but I thought I'd show that.
That is fun.
There's a couple other places it looks like on here down towards the border. You have
Yeah.
something there.
So the border is very, very important to Texas and beyond, and people don't realize it. So there are ports of entry down there, Laredo, and there's a couple others that the traffic that goes back and forth to bring in produce and products and all of that. I don't know if it was one of the major import zones, right? So there's a lot of activity that goes on down there. People don't stop to realize how much comes through those ports of entry down there. And especially with the pandemic, it's been interesting watching how it's been open, closed, and the impact that it has on produce and manufactured goods. I worked with a company that we had raw materials sent to Mexico across the border, finished products brought back across. And if you can think of anything that's manufactured off of a raw product, it is very likely it's manufactured in that region in Mexico and then brought back into the States.
I was gonna ask you about something, and I don't want to get too political, but I do have a question on a topic that's sometimes
Mhm.
linked to politics,
Yes.
which is the border.
Yes.
And so, speaking as a Texan, I would like your view on the importance of whether or not, because I know there's always you got trade on one hand, you got security on the other. Like, where do you fall on that? What's your perspective?
Yeah, so here's the thing for me. I tend to be a humanitarian. And so when people are fleeing the countries that they're leaving, Central America, primarily Central America, these are not people coming in from Mexico, as many people would like you to believe. Primarily, they're Central America. And there's political and humanitarian crises down there that are causing these people to leave. And so it's not the rhetoric or the hype around they're leaving for their lives. They literally are leaving for their lives. And I've talked to a number of them who've come up from Guatemala and other places like that. They really are running for their lives. And so for me, I side on the humanitarian. How can we be supportive of these people? How can we create a safe environment for these people? And I will say this, I don't usually use this word. I abhor the politics around people. These people do not let me say that differently. So these people deserve better than to be political pawns in this situation that's going on. We recently had a significant number of male youths that were here in a facility. They were being cared for, and as soon as things started going really, really well, the other side of the political equation tore it apart, and the facility had to be closed, and all the boys were dispersed. So that's one thing is the coming across the border. I think there's a way of doing it in a humanitarian way. We actually have Del Rio and Laredo are two areas that are most affected by this. And I watched a news report this week from their mayors. One mayor is obviously a heterosexual, the other is gay, and the gay mayor is very compassionate about this and trying to balance the two pieces. The thing that people don't know also around the border is that because San Antonio is located where it is on the I-10 corridor and the 35 corridor, it is the #1 intersection for human trafficking. And in fact, yesterday there was a story of a travel tractor, those big 18-wheeler tractors, was filled with dozens of people who eventually were found, and some of them ran and some of them got arrested. Uh, on a monthly basis, there is some major human trafficking story in San Antonio. So it's not only people coming across individually who are being victimized by people who charge them money and then just leave them. Children are coming across on their own. And then there's these organized individuals who are extorting people for money, putting them in these trailers, tractor trailers, and bringing them across. So there is a crisis at the border. The crisis is not a political crisis; it's a humanitarian crisis. So that's as political as I've ever been about that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for sharing it with me. I feel like everybody around the country has their own views on it, but I think you have a unique perspective being directly from Texas. It allows you to be able to share with my students
Yes.
what's going on there. So I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. And one thing I'll say as we leave that is, I won't share anything with you that I don't have firsthand knowledge around. I have sat with individuals from places in Central America who've come here. I've had conversations with them as far back as 20 years. This is not new. 20 years ago, having conversations with them about why would you leave your country and come here? And over again, it's for safety. It's for safety. And how can you deny someone the opportunity to live in a safe environment?
Makes perfect sense to me, at least.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the economy and the people who are hiring in the state of Texas. Now, obviously, you have larger companies like University of Texas, MD Anderson, which is a cancer center there.
It is.
Um, Texas Department of Transportation, University of Texas has surprisingly a huge number of people that it hires in.
Yes.
Oil companies like Chevron, Dow Chemicals, DXC Technology, and of course, the Space Center located in Houston.
Yep.
Is there anybody that maybe I've left off there? You're like, oh my gosh, these people are such a huge hiring mecca in the state.
Well, the one that jumps out for me is in Austin. It's Apple. Apple has a campus in Austin, and it's quite large, and it continues to grow. And it just tells you that Apple, being a company out of California, has put roots into Austin. So it tells you a lot about the community, why they would be there. And I've had people who've actually worked there that love it. So Apple is a big employer in the Austin area. We have a company here locally, USAA, which is actually a national company. And USAA is here in San Antonio. They're headquartered. They have offices in other parts of the state, and they're a premier organization, not only in their hiring practices and their service model. Also, they just recently named a chief diversity officer for their entire organization. So they are making leaps and bounds, having recently gotten 100% on their HRC rating. So that's a big deal. That's a military-based organization. They've come a long way in terms of broadening and opening up their views on DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What people don't know is that Plano, which is north of Dallas, is actually headquarters city. So you'll find companies up there, Pepsi, Frito-Lay, Penny's, Kohl's department stores. And there's a whole long list of companies that are actually headquartered in Plano. So they're in that North Texas area. And then if you look in Houston, again, they've diversified their portfolio of businesses. So it's not uncommon to see lots and lots of insurance companies, investment companies, entertainment companies. So yeah, I'm told by watching the news that our governor thinks that our economy is coming back. And so I'm watching for these companies to see what they're doing to return workers and hire more workers back into their businesses.
Yeah, because you come from an HR background. So, I mean, you're
I do.
obviously very in tune with that. Speaking of that as well, so obviously there's some ramifications. And again, I don't want to get into politics too much, but there are, but it seems like that's where we're going with this. So there are some ramifications apparently from the business community that are popping up from the Texas voter laws that are now starting to come about through the legislation. Have you heard anything about that? I mean, I thought AT&T was getting involved in that now.
Yes. So let me do this for a minute. Um, so Texas as a voting state. So Texas as a voting state votes conservatively. Texas as a state to live in is progressive. And let me give you the examples around it. So we've elected, and I say that because I'm a Texan, not because I voted. Uh, we have a Republican governor, a Republican lieutenant governor, and a Republican attorney general. We have a Republican, what's the word? They're dominant, right? Whatever.
The
They're
party?
the sorry.
Are you talking about the party in
Yeah,
general, the
yeah. So
Republican Party?
our legislators are made up predominantly of Republicans. So that's the elected part of it, right? That's the voted part of it. The progressive part of it is having conversations with people and talking to them. So topics like we talked earlier about immigration, people are progressive. Talking about LGBTQ rights, people are progressive, right? These types of conversations that we have. Michael and I live in a neighborhood where there's 100 other houses. We're the only gay couple here. Our neighbors that live on each of the houses around us absolutely love us, reach out to us, have conversations with us. One even went so far as to say, we've never had gay friends and we want to be the best we want to be the best friends we can be to you, right? So the
Aw.
progressive side of it, right? There's a progressive side of it. What unfortunately happens is Texas don't do a good job of getting everyone out to vote. So now these voter restriction laws that are being put in place are going to make it even more difficult to get people out and mobilize them into the voting. I always early vote, and early vote has always been very expansive, lots of opportunity, and they're constricting it, right? They're making it less available. So I think what will happen is, much like anything that we've experienced in our history, is that the backlash to some of these things will come in more ferocious, and then people will find the reason to get up and go out and vote. We recently completed our legislative session here, and I want to think the number was somewhere between 11 and 15 anti-trans bills were introduced. So really, really severe legislation against the trans community. And fortunately, there were people who stood up and they weren't able to get to vote. However, now the governor rather, is pushing for a special session for it. So people are on pins and needles wondering what's going to happen. So I think the thing to understand from my perspective, only my opinion, is that Texas has this dichotomy, which is Texas votes conservatively and puts people in place to make conservative decisions and laws. However, the people that you talk to and are your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues, and et cetera, they tend to be more progressive, more understanding of what I call the human element.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I really,
Thank you.
it helps me to better understand kind of where you're at on that.
Thank you.
Um, let's share a little bit about the travel and transportation within your state. I keep hearing you talk about this corridor that you're talking about. Um, how are the highways out there? Are they a little bit more bumpy, or are they like silk?
Yeah, so I think I like that analogy. I think our highways, and those are um, the national as well as the state. I think our highways are well maintained. I know that there's always, I mean, one of the jokes in Texas is that every major road has been worked on for the last 50 years. They just never stop working on these roads. And in fact, there's a road that goes north of where I live that's gone from a 2x2 to an expanded 4x4. And it took them several years to do it. We actually went up there the other day to take the pup for a groom, and it'd been a while since I've been up there, and it's perfect. I mean, it's great. It's 20 years after the fact that they needed it, and yet it works perfectly. So I say the highways are well maintained. They're continually being worked on. All over the state, you can see if you're traveling that roads are being worked on. They're easy to drive on. The lesser roads, right, you start coming down. It's not until you get into the really, really poor areas of cities do you find the roads are not being maintained. And so, for example, in San Antonio, there's a big push underway to take some of the money and redirect it to areas of town that do have potholes and have layers of macadam on top of it that makes the ride not smooth, et cetera. So there is a movement underway to level it out. and it becomes one of those things around economics and politics. It's like, the nice areas get the nice roads and the other areas don't.
It's the same thing with education too. It seems like that's always been a
Big
problem.
time. Yes, big time.
Yeah. What about in terms of the airports? Now, you've mentioned a couple of them that are like super impressive there. So
Yes,
it sounds like air transportation is very, very big within the state of Texas, correct?
yes. Yeah, it's a really, really big deal for me. So I pay attention to it. San Antonio has come a long way. We have a lot more nonstops into Latin America, so and Mexico, so that's really good. So, for example, for me, if I went, I talked earlier about Ecuador. All we have to do is leave here, go to Mexico City, and then go on to Quito, Ecuador. It's that quick to get to South America. So, South America from San Antonio is great. Then you look at Austin. Now, Austin is going into Europe nonstop. And again, this assumes that everyone can access the United States, right? So this is more. Then you go into Dallas. Dallas has been known for quite some time for being a city that has expanded. I remember when they introduced the Dallas Sydney Australia nonstop. So that was a big, big deal. You could go from Texas to Australia in one flight. And then you look at Houston, which I'm most familiar with. I remember going to the airport because I'm the guy who would like go there and watch planes take off and land. And when the British Airways flight would come in or the Air France flight would come in, I'd get all excited. Now, if I go there, I can see the nonstop to Beijing, the nonstop to Istanbul, the nonstop to right. And so I look at this, and in fact, I make my bucket list based on flights I want to take. So when I got to take not once, twice, three times the flight between Houston and Istanbul nonstop, 14 and a half hours, that was like a big, huge deal for me. Because it's like, can you imagine getting on a plane in Houston and 14 hours later you're in Istanbul? I was like, yeah, mind blown. So I watch the airports big time. I watch them expand. I watch them grow. I pay attention to, for example, San Antonio now has a new airline called Breeze. So Breeze has just come in. It's a low-cost carrier competing with, which I can't imagine why anybody would do this. However, they're competing with other low-cost carriers, and we'll see what they do with it. So yeah, air travel, airports, all of that type of stuff is. I mean, if you say, Phil, what is one of your top 10 hobbies? Top 10 hobbies is commercial air and airports.
Fantastic. Now, obviously, I can't talk about transportation unless I bring up ports as well. And I know Galveston is another really big one where a lot of cruises go out of, especially for
Yes.
people who are traveling. Talk to me a little bit about, have you had an opportunity to go down to the Gulf area and or viewed some of the ports?
Yes. So we've taken actually at least two cruises out of Galveston, well, out of that area. One we took out of Galveston directly, very easy, very organized. This again is all pre-COVID. Great experience. The only drawback is you can't really get deep into the Caribbean. So, it's more about the sea days than it is the ports. So we did that. We also did a cruise out of a place that Princess only used for one season. It was up the channel, and because the weather and the conditions, it ended up that it was not favorable, so they shut it down and left. So my understanding is that the cruise industry is going to come back to Galveston, and again, it's going to be more about if you take a cruise out of Galveston, it's going to be for the sea days, not for the port days, because that's the way it's configured.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the industrial port, I worked for a manufacturing company, and all of our goods from China and other places in the world all came into Galveston. And then from Galveston, they would be shipped by rail into other parts. So the Texas Ship Channel and the Port of Galveston and all of that area, it's got to be within the top three, because LA is one, San Francisco, LA. Yeah, it might be within the top three, Galveston, the Port of Texas.
Excellent. On a side note,
Mhm.
what is your favorite cruise line to go on?
Um, because I'm a cruise snob and I have elite status, very high elite status with Princess, I love Princess. Princess
I
has, right?
I'm a princess person too. My favorite
Yeah.
ship actually is the Regal Princess. So
Yes, yes, yes.
I'm
Yeah.
absolutely on board with you on that.
And nothing against Holland America. We had heard so much about it and we took it. And there's a huge difference between the service delivery of a British influenced ship versus the Dutch influenced. And I'm not saying we didn't have a bad experience. I'm just saying that I could tell the difference being on the British ship. One quick story. So my mom and I were going on a cruise from San Francisco to Hawaii, and we were going to do the 15 days and so on. So my sister and her wife decided that they were going to, and this was my mom's birthday trip. So they were going to fly into Hawaii and they were going to surprise my mom when we got to the Big Island after our travels. So what happened was I went to the front desk and I said, my sister and her wife are going to meet us. I think it was Hilo was our port. They're going to meet us at Hilo when we arrive. Can we make accommodations for them to come onto the ship? And this again is pre-COVID and all that stuff. No, that's not possible. I said, okay. So I wrote a very nice letter and I sent it to the customer service director. And then I got a phone call. Can I come down to reception? So I went down to reception and the director of customer service met with me and she said, they'll have passes. They can stay on the ship as long as they want. Everything's fine. Good. Okay. So then what happens is the day comes. So I'm trying to organize so my mom doesn't know that they're here. I've ordered breakfast for us to have breakfast on the veranda. I've got the cabin steward involved. Everybody's in on this surprise with my mom, right? So then I get the call from my sister that she and her wife were at the port. So I said to my mom, I said, I got to go do something. I'll be back. And so I left her and I went and, breakfast can't come until after I get back. I mean, it was the whole thing of organizing it. So I get down there, I meet my sister and her wife and they get all processed and everything. And guess who doesn't have his ship card?
Oh no. What happened?
I
How
didn't
did you
have
get back
a
on?
ship card. I left in such a rush, I didn't have it. So the woman's like, you can't get back on. And I'm like, oh, no. You don't understand. I'm not going back and getting my card. They can't, I'm like, what are we going to do? So I called my friend, the customer service director. I told her what was going on. She said, I can vouch for him. My sister and her wife came with me. We walked down the hallway. We got to the cabin. The cabin steward knocked on the door. My mom opened it and there they were. And it was a great surprise and it's a great memory. After all the details, attention, all the details, I forgot my ship card.
I have talked to people who have traveled halfway across the world and couldn't get on a cruise because they forgot their passport or something. Not their passport, but they forgot like something where they were
Yes.
like, oh, they can't get on the ship because they forgot
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, it just boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Sorry, let's get back really quick to this because
So
I mean,
thank you for
again,
letting me share that story.
no, I love talking about this. This is
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's a lot of fun.
Now, on the East Coast of the United States, I know travel through train is very prominent, but not so much in Texas.
No, it's an ongoing challenge here because, for example, if you look at the corridor between here and Austin and on to Dallas, or if you look at between here and Houston, these are great opportunities for train travel because they're not dissimilar from the distances on the East Coast between Boston, New York, and say Philadelphia or DC. The challenge here is that Texans have a love affair with their trucks. And I say trucks because that's primary, right? So you're not getting me on my truck. I'm driving my truck to Houston, right? And the reality is that if more and more people saw the value and the benefit of getting in a train and traveling, I think it would change. One thing that is happening here that people may not be aware of is the bus system. So I'm not talking about the Greyhound of my childhood. I'm talking about these buses that have come in and they're, high-end luxury buses. They have, air conditioning, big seats, meals on board, access to whatever. So it's like being in a business or first class to travel between the cities. And these are very, very nice motor coaches traveling or whatever. And so they're between, all the major cities that I've talked about, Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. And their fares are so reasonably cheap that people now are figuring out, you know what? I can jump on that bus. They can do the driving. I can have a couple drinks and dinner along the way, and I'm on it. So I think there may be an evolution of people getting there. Right now, there's too many people that are there. It's all about my car. It's all about my truck. I'm not giving it up.
Okay, then. But what about in terms of tourism within your state? Like, what are the big like amusement parks and places that people would want to go? I mean, obviously people go to sports events, but like, what
Yeah.
are some things that people want to see? Obviously, the Alamo, I'm sure, is a huge tourist
Yeah.
attraction.
And again, with the Alamo, if you come to Texas and you go to the Alamo, please go beyond the Alamo and see the other missions. They are really, really worth the time to go to the other missions, especially the churches and those kind of places. So Texas has a wide variety of amusement park. The Six Flags and Fiesta Texas, those are all the ones with traditional rides. They have water parks associated with them. There's places in Austin that They're like safari adventures. You can actually stay there, go there, and then, go out into the safari land or whatever. So lots and lots of the traditional places to go for amusement rides, for water parks. One of the things that stands out for Texas that I always appreciate being able to say something about is a place called Morgan's Wonderland. It's here in San Antonio, and it is a completely accessible amusement park for people of any physical ability. So it's an all-inclusive park, and it was developed by a man whose name is Gordon Hartman. He has that Morgan's Wonderland for people, as I say, of all abilities, and now he is creating a camp for the same. And so, children, young people who are in wheelchairs or whatever other, abilities they have, they can go there and have the exact same experience as everyone else. It's an amazing, amazing place. People from all over the world come to San Antonio, Texas to experience that.
What a wonderful story. I love
Yeah.
that. Do you know
Yeah.
when that started?
So what I know about it is that he came and spoke at a company I was at in 2008. And so he had the idea in 2008 and shared it with us as an audience. And within 10 years, he had it built, all based on donations, all based on donations.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, again, don't like to jump into religion or politics too much, but since we're on the topic of governments and we talked a little bit about that earlier, you had me mentioned that people tend to vote conservatively. Is that just on the federal level, or is that also on the local levels too?
So it's on the local level in terms of the state. So the state, as I mentioned earlier, the top three officials, they're Republican, conservative. In Bexar County, which is where San Antonio is, we don't vote by party. However, our county commissioner, county judges we call them, and then our mayor, they're both Democrats or independents. And so there is a difference there. I know for a fact that the mayor in Houston is Democrat. I'm not familiar with who's in Dallas right now. However, it would not surprise me that Dallas might have a conservative elected mayor, because that's, again, another differentiation. So one of the ways this played out was with the mask mandate. So we had executive orders at the state level that preempted the county and city level. And so you saw the politics being played out in one side saying masks aren't necessary, people can make their own decisions. And then the other side saying we don't have enough people vaccinated to release the. And so it was interesting watching it play out, because again, that's the difference between the politics that are elected and the day-to-day people and how we live, right? So we live, like Michael and I went, where did we go yesterday? We went, I don't know. We went somewhere yesterday, and I was surprised because we continue to choose to wear masks even though we're double vaxxed. We come in contact with people out there that I would say 90% of them are wearing masks. So they're not paying attention to the state mandate. They're making good, in my opinion, good sound decisions that are healthy for themselves and others.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about the natural resources you have within your state. Obviously, if anybody has not heard that oil comes from Texas, they must be living under a derrick. So,
Exactly.
but apart from that, obviously coal and natural gas go along with that. Is there any other major natural resources that are out there that you can think of?
So let's see, natural gas, right? So we have what is that called? Fracking. We have fracking in Texas, and I think that's to extract natural gas out of the ground. I'm not scientific, so I think that's going on. Definitely oil and gas. I had an opportunity a year ago to drive out to Midland, Texas, which is far west Texas, and I got to a point where when I was driving, all I saw was these derricks, right? Just all of these derricks going, and it reminds you that Texas has it has a big oil and gas reserve, the natural gas that's going on. I'm trying to think of what other timber, wood in Northeast Texas. People might not think of it. There's a small yet sustainable sort of lumber industry in that area because of the types of trees that grow there, et cetera, et cetera. So those probably would be the top ones.
Okay, perfect. Now, in terms of education, most people may not be totally familiar with the wonderful colleges that are in the great state of Texas. You have
Yeah.
Texas A&M that's been there since 1876. You
Yes.
have the University of Texas, all throughout. I'm just highlighted Austin on here, but I mean it's all
Yep.
throughout the state. And then
It
of
is.
course Texas State University has been there since 1899. But are there any other large Texas institutions that maybe I haven't mentioned that you want to highlight?
So let's see. I'll start with Houston because again, that's my adopted adult hometown. Rice University is in Houston, and it's very. I mean, it's an amazing university. So Rice University is there. I think they might refer to it as the Ivy League of the South. So it's a really the campus is beautiful. The school is great. Also, let's see what else is there. Texas Southern University, which is a predominantly Black school, that school has really, really good reputation. Michael Strahan from Good Morning America graduated from there. Some others did as well. So it's a very preeminent school in the South, the historically Black population of students. And then if you look at Dallas, of course, you have SMU, Southern Methodist University, really well known for turning out attorneys and those types of people. And I don't mean those kind of people, those educated people, right? And then, as you pointed out, UT in Austin, and UT has branches in Tyler and pretty much everywhere else in the state. And then Texas A&M out of College Station, small town, not very big, and yet it's got a huge presence. We have a campus here in San Antonio. For Texas A&M, it's I know quite a few people there, including the president of the university. Very well known, great reputation. They're working very closely with Toyota because Toyota has a plant close down there. So that's all good. And then we have, in San Antonio, University of Incarnate Word, Trinity University, St. Mary's Law School. So yes, I mean, lots and lots of good schools in Texas, and lots of opportunity to get a really outstanding degree.
So then talk to me a little bit about the literacy rate, because that's where a little bit of the dichotomy comes in sometimes.
Yeah, it's a really good question because if you look at cities like Dallas and Houston, what you might expect is that and I don't know the exact numbers, this is all anecdotal. Those cities tend to have higher literacy rates because they tend to have higher educational levels. So, looking at people who might have a minimum of a bachelor's degree and then some. When you look at San Antonio, more specifically, where I live and know more about, there has been a history of let's see how I'm going to say this. So there's a history in San Antonio of systemic racism, and so what that means is that access to homes, access to education, all of those things was limited to people based on the color of their skin. So it was actually written into deeds and laws and ordinances and that type of stuff. So as a result of that, if you go to the south side of San Antonio, which is predominantly the Hispanic lower income, what you find is a very, very low literacy rate. That literacy rate then corresponds with the economics and the quality of life. Versus if you go to the north side of San Antonio and you look at the schools and the teachers and the educational system that's been put together, those students are coming out and going to the best of the best schools. So San Antonio, and I got to participate in some meetings around this over the last year. San Antonio is combining the government, academics, and then business together to figure out the plan forward. How do we create more access for increasing literacy rates? I have a friend who runs a nonprofit that she specifically targets elementary school children and getting books in their hand and then giving them the opportunity to create the habit and practice of reading. So, and it may not be that their parents can support them in that. So there are reading mentors who can actually help these children learn how to read. And in the process, the parents might pick up some of it as well. So it is a huge challenge for the San Antonio area specifically based on what I know over the last year.
That's wonderful, though. That I really want to connect with you on your friend who's getting that involved. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and I'd certainly love to help if I can.
Excellent.
So,
Thank you.
um, so let's just really quickly wrap up with security and safety. Now, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm trying to think of any like major crime issues that come out of Texas. Nothing really. I mean, obviously, human trafficking that can be a little bit of a problem.
Yes.
Well, obviously, it's a major problem, but I mean,
Yes.
the number, I don't know what the stats are on human trafficking across the states within the United States, but my guess is obviously that's something that needs to be addressed. But what about in terms of foreign and domestic terrorism threats? Is that something that you have to worry about in Texas at all?
So I would say to you, up until now, no, right? I would say up until now, no. However, having had the gas line and the meat manufacturing company JBS, there were two ferry systems recently, hospital systems. So I would have said to you up until now, no, I don't think that Texas would be under threat. Now I would say to you that I think Texas would have a moderate threat that requires some type of proactive approach to it. You know, we've got the space system here. We have the oil and gas system here. We have a lot of industry here. If it were threatened or closed down or shut down, would have an impact beyond Texas. So I think leaders, and I'm a big deal, a big leadership is a big deal for me. I think leaders have a responsibility now to make it an absolute priority to figure out how to be proactive against these threats that clearly something will come into Texas. I don't know when or how, something will come into Texas.
It's just a matter of time, in your opinion.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay. Well, let's raise our spirits up a little bit. I'm going to give you a 60 seconds to sell me on Texas. All right, here's the scenario. I have a round trip ticket to come and see you. What are
Okay.
we going to do? What are you going to show me? I have no idea. I've never been there before. Sell me on Texas within 60 seconds. Go for it.
All right. So in San Antonio specifically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the opportunity to connect with the community. I want you to meet all the different kinds of people that are here. I want you to experience the diversity firsthand. And the best way I know to do that is to do a food journey. So we're going to go from one restaurant to the next, to the next, to the next. And then we'll cap you off each night while you're here, going to some event at the Tobin Performing Arts Center or a concert or something in the evening that will give us an opportunity to connect to the arts in San Antonio. So come to San Antonio, it's a great place.
Are you sure you don't have a background in event planning? Because darn it, that's amazing.
I do, wink, wink.
Okay.
Yes,
So again, Phil, I want to thank you so very much for taking the time for myself and my students to educate us a little bit about Texas. I learned a lot today, and I hope you had a great time as well.
I
So
did.
thank you.
Yes,
Now, for the benefit of my students, you've also done writing before as well. You're a published author, correct?
I am, yes. And so the book called Wings of Wisdom, Lessons Learned at 35,000 Feet, came to me in what I call a download. So I woke up one morning, I had this book come into my head, and I was about to be 60 years old and thought, you know what, if ever I'm going to publish a book, it's going to be before I turn 60. So I put this book together. It's been published, and I refer to it sometimes as that artwork that your kid did for the first time and you put it up on the refrigerator and you have to have it on the refrigerator even though it's like, oh, I can't look at it. The stories in it are what really stand out. So these are stories of my conversations with flight attendants in the galleys while traveling around the world. And there is so much to be learned by connecting with others. And unfortunately, flight attendants are either seen as being invisible or most recently beat up and treated inappropriately. And so for me, what I loved was being able to go in the galley. And I always knew I was on the inside when they pulled the curtain around me. I always knew I was on the inside when the curtain came around me and I was in the galley with them. And then that's when all the conversations would take place.
And for us to get a better idea of that, it's available on Amazon, correct?
It is available. Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Phil. I'm going to get it myself, but I'll definitely make sure to get it out to my students as well. So thank you so
Thank
kindly.
you. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Now, for my students that are out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can certainly send me email at scott@theprofessortravel.com, and I'll be more than happy to either address that, or if there's additional information you'd like to know on Texas, I can get that out to Phil, and maybe we can get a little bit of a wrap up on that. So again, Phil, thank you so much for your time on this.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this conversation tremendously.
This was great. Thank you. Now, again, for my students that are out there, if you are on YouTube right now and you want to be notified about when new videos go up, click that bell icon right above me and that'll help with that. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to subscribe. It doesn't cost anything and we really appreciate it. And then of course, if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, give us a thumbs up. So that way we can like that and know about that. But if you're on the podcast, certainly feel free to rate us and review us. We really appreciate the information. So until our next time, my name is Scott. I am the Professor Travel, and make every day a travel adventure. Take care, everybody. Bye bye now.